one of life's most difficult experiences is helplessly standing by a loved one when they're struggling with terminal illness. Popular author Anne Lamott's best friend was dying of cancer. Lamott was with her every day. She went through the range of emotions that beset us in such a situation: helplessness, depression, anger. She made an appointment with Pammy's doctor, and he said the most surprising thing to her: watch her carefully right now, because she's teaching you how to live. Lamott reflected later: I remind myself of this when I cannot get any work done. To live as if I'm dying, because the truth is that we are all terminal on this bus. To live as if we are dying. Time is so full for people who are dying in a conscious way, full the way life is for children. They spend the big round hours. So instead of staring miserably at the computer screen, trying to will my way into having a breakthrough, I say to myself, okay, let's see, dying tomorrow, what should I do today? Or as someone succinctly put it, live each day as if it were your last. There is, in fact, something about the limits of life that make it more precious. Something about the awareness of life's inevitable end that makes living it more intentional, more meaningful, more pregnant with possibility. Psychiatrist and philosopher Rollo May wrote a lot about it. He said, the most excruciating joy is accompanied by the unconsciousness of the imminence of death. Love is a reminder of our own mortality. In his classic, Love and Will, May cites Abraham Maslow, who, while recuperating from a near fatal heart attack, reflected, the confrontation with death, the reprieve from it, make everything look so precious, so sacred, so beautiful, that I feel more strongly than ever the impulse to love it, to embrace it, to let myself be overwhelmed by it. My river has never looked so beautiful. And death and its ever-present possibility makes love, passionate love, more possible. I wonder if we could love more passionately, if ecstasy would be possible, if we knew we'd never die. It's why the Christian church for centuries has observed Lent, the 40 days before Easter, not counting Sundays, a season of the church year whose purpose is to remind us of two unpleasant realities that we'd rather not think about: sin and death. The fact that our relationship with God and our relationships with one another are in need of healing, and in Anne Lamott's imagery, everyone on this bus is terminal. Lent began on Wednesday. Ashes, the ancient symbol of grief and death and sin. And as the smudge of ashes is placed on the forehead, ministers looked one in the eye and said words that have been said for centuries. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Christianity maintains that the healthiest thing you can do about your own soul, your relationship with God and with others, is to bring some honesty to the table by acknowledging the reality, the power of sin and death. Remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. Sobering language, Episcopal priest Barbara Brown Taylor calls it. It's hard for a healthy adult, she writes, to hear. But when it is said for a 3-year-old child or a person gaunt from chemotherapy, it can sound too harsh for words. It is language that yanks away all of our deceit about death. After the service, she says she stumbles out of the church, walks blinking back into the world where we do have jobs to do. A few people will helpfully tell her that she has some dirt on her forehead, and she responds, "Yes, I know. That's my mortality. I thought I'd let it show today." "No danger," Brown quips. "That Ash Wednesday and Lent will be commercialized. No danger that Hallmark will design a card or that shopkeepers will dress their windows in sackcloth and ashes. These are not market-friendly concepts. Entertainment is a market-friendly concept, even in religion." Neil Gabler, author and movie critic, wrote a piece in the New York Times one year about two Oscar frontrunners and observed that both pictures were remarkably similar under the surface. Both tapped the same wellspring of discontent and anxiety in modern America, and both dealt with the same subject. Each tells the story of a society in the throes of amusing itself to death and the cost of doing so. He continued, "It is no secret. Americans are obsessed with entertainment. And if in TV viewing is any gauge, probably spend more time distracting themselves from life than engaging in it. Entertainment value is the standard by which things are measured, be it education, politics, or even religion. Human mortality is not very entertaining. In fact, our culture goes to great lengths to deny and disguise it. We don't even like to say the word death. Woody Allen once said, "I don't mind the thought of dying. I just don't want to be there." Unlike our predecessors in all of human history, we don't usually see it happen. It happens not in the midst of everyday life, but mostly in an antiseptic institutional environment. A friend of mine, a physician who deals with human mortality every day, all day, was experiencing impatience with the fact that a newly minted clergy don't seem to have thought about the fact that people die. She wrote, "They seem genuinely surprised that death happens here. I've always been tempted to ask, where do you think these people go?" At the beginning of his ministry, immediately following his baptism, the event that affirmed for him that he was who he was and what God wanted him to do, Jesus learned about mortality. The text for the first Sunday in Lent is always the same. Jesus in the wilderness, tempted by Satan. It's a fascinating scene. Jesus at the age of 30 had to walk into the Jordan River, and his cousin John had poured water over him, and in that moment, Jesus had a clear sense that God has a claim on his life. He had a vocation to be God's son, to live absolutely according to God's will. Full of the Spirit of God, he went into the wilderness for 40 days, led by the Spirit, driven by the Spirit. Matthew and Mark put it. Wilderness suggests a thick, impenetrable forest with no path, no way to follow. In fact, this wilderness is the opposite. Miles and miles, as far as the eye can see, of barren, arid, rocky desert. No contrast, no green, no noticeable life. It's south of Jordan. I've seen it from a bus window at 70 miles an hour. Even then, its utter barrenness is frightening. It's also absolutely quiet. If you sit in this wilderness, the silence is literally deafening. So silent that you can hear a humming in your head, which I'm told is the sound of your own nervous system. Jesus was tempted 3 times by Satan. 3 curiously benign temptations: to turn stones into bread and resolve his hunger. Nothing particularly evil about that. To seek political power and to preside over the literal kingdom of justice and righteousness. Not a bad idea. And to demonstrate dramatically his power and God's favorable inclination towards him, to establish a little credibility, jump off the temple. No harm will come. God will preserve and protect, he is told. The devil even quotes scripture to make his argument, and Jesus interestingly quotes scripture right back. A kind of Bible contest. Jesus wins, however, because he's quoting Torah, the law, Deuteronomy. One does not live by bread alone. Worship the Lord your God and serve only God. Do not put the Lord your God to the test. And at the end of the day, 40 days in that wilderness, Jesus has learned about limits. The limits beyond which he must not and cannot go if he is to be faithful to God and to himself. The final limit, very clear when you're in that wilderness and you're starving to death, the limits of human life. It was a lesson he had to learn. He did not have forever. There was a terminal point in his life. He did not know when it would be, but that it was out there. And it turned out it was only 3 years away. But by learning about it, he also learned that critical lesson, that his life was precious, that every day mattered, that every word spoken, every gesture, every relationship was sacred and holy and irretrievable. He learned about his own mortality at the age of 30. Now, we don't have any daily records. We don't know very much actually about how he lived each day. We know about a few days. We know some of the things he did and he said. But I'd like to think that after that time in the wilderness, he lived every day, every moment of every day with high and holy intentionality. Knowing about your mortality can do that. Alfred Delp was a Jesuit arrested and sentenced to death by the Nazis for participating in a resistance organization. He kept a daily diary in which he was secreted out of the prison and was published after the war. He wrote, "One has to keep reminding oneself that death is around the corner. Condemned to death, the thought refuses to penetrate. But I am now a man internally free and far more genuine than I was before. One thing is becoming gradually clear. I must surrender myself completely. This is seed time, not harvest. God, keep me in his providence and give me strength to meet what is before me." In the wilderness, Jesus learned that there were limits and that one day his life would end. And he learned one thing further. The devil quoted Psalm 91. "He will command his angels concerning you to protect you. On their hands they will bear you up so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." What Jesus had to have learned out there in the blazing sun and the howling night wind was that those words did not guarantee his physical safety. He learned a lesson we must all learn sooner or later, namely that God does not protect us from suffering, illness, tragedy, and death. He will deliver you from the snare of the fowler, the psalm says. Under his wings you will find refuge, because you have made the Lord your refuge. no evil shall befall you. What Jesus learned in the desert was that evil most certainly does befall you, that his own life would be particularly subject to it, that at the end of the road for him was a cross. What he learned was that whatever happened, God would not abandon him. Whatever limits he had to endure, the ultimate limit of his own death, he was ultimately safe in the love that would never leave him, love that would hold him, love that would give him strength and courage he needed to live each day thereafter with a sense of his mortality, and therefore with a sense of each day's precious beauty. You and I should spend some time in the wilderness to learn that. Jane Kenyon, a distinguished American poet, learned it. Dying of leukemia at the age of 48, she worked with her husband, Donald Hull, also a distinguished poet, to compile what she knew would be her last volume of poems. She titled the book Otherwise, after one of her poems. I got out of bed on two strong legs. It might have been otherwise. I ate cereal, sweet milk, ripe, flawless peach. It might have been otherwise. I took the dog uphill to the birch wood. All morning I did the work I love. At noon I lay down with my mate. It might have been otherwise. We ate dinner together at a table with silver candlesticks. It might have been otherwise. I slept in a bed in a room with paintings on the walls, planned another day just like this day. But one day, I know it will be otherwise. One day, it will be otherwise. May we live until then with a sense of our mortality and therefore with a sense of the precious beauty of each day. One day it will be otherwise, and on that day may we offer up all our days to the Most High, our fortress, the one in whose unconditional love we are forever safe, forever free, under whose wings is our eternal refuge. Thanks be to God for his comforting word this day.